Good morning, eighth grade. We are ready to begin our final chapter of World Geography. Today we're going to start looking at Australia and New Zealand. Please get the notes. If you are watching this video and you don't have your notes, pause it right now. Go get the notes off of Google Classroom and come back to watch this video. I'm going to fly through this chapter. That's why I'm telling you that, because we need to be ready next week to start reviewing for our exam. We are not going to take the time to have a chapter test for chapter 21 that you just finished on North Africa. Neither are we going to have a test on chapter 22, but both of these will be part of your semester exam, which we'll talk about more next week. Okay, but for right now, you really need the notes because you will not be able to keep up with me. I am supposed to take 6 days to complete this chapter, and I'm going to hopefully do it in 3, maybe 4. Okay, so you need to have the notes in front of you so that you can jot down little notes to explain what you already have written down. Okay, let's talk about Australia and New Zealand. They are lands of great enchantment, I guess is a good way to say that. We're fascinated with Australia and with what it can do, what they have there, and the things that are interesting there. I'm looking, okay, I have a video or a little clip I want to play you when we get to the different part of the video. Okay, so these are the two most remote regions on the earth. Oceania, which we are not going to look at, we're not going to have time to get there, and Antarctica. We're going to look at part of Oceania, I guess I should say. Part of Oceania is Australia and New Zealand, but part of it is the rest of the islands, and we are not going to have time to do everything. The main islands of Oceania were probably among the last lands settled by Noah's descendants. They would include Australia and New Zealand. And we're going to talk about the native people on both of these islands. In Australia, they're the Aborigines. In New Zealand, it is the Maori. Okay, they were very isolated people here, and we didn't find them until about the 18th century, which is the 1700s. And they had not yet heard the gospel at that point. They were completely without a gospel influence. So many people have since then gone to these Aborigine and Maori people to deliver the gospel to them with mixed success. Okay, we're going to talk about the settlement here in just a minute. The English settlers also discovered rich soil and grasslands on the island of New Zealand and on the continent of Australia. Hopefully we'll get through both. Here is a map, and oh boogers, I don't have a cursor. Some days I get a cursor, some days I don't. Today I didn't. Okay, so I want you to look at the map. Notice that the entire western side of Australia, the left side, is Western Australia. It is one great big state. Then in the middle you have the Northern and Northern Territory and South Australia. Then on the right side, which is the most populated, so the east side is most populated, you have Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and then the island of Tasmania. Okay, then New Zealand we'll talk about separately. So today we're going to talk about, hopefully get through Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. Notice up in Queensland that right off the coast you have the Great Barrier Reef. Okay, that is a very important tourist attraction for Australia. Okay, notice too on this, we're used to looking at this by now, hopefully. Notice the lifespan for people who live in Australia and New Zealand. Almost 82 years in Australia. That's wonderful. It speaks very highly of their quality of life. Okay, so let's first look at Australia. Okay, Australia, as we all know, is often referred to as the land down under because it lies in the southern hemisphere. They are getting ready to go into winter now. Now, that does not mean that they're going to have snow, all over Australia. That is not necessarily their climate. They do have some snow-capped mountains. We'll talk about those later. But for the most part, their seasons are opposite of what we have here in the Northern Hemisphere. It is the smallest and flattest continent. Okay. It's also the driest inhabited continent. Of course, the very driest continent is Antarctica, but it's not inhabited, at least not on a permanent basis. There are people who live there temporarily, but not permanently. But Australia has an average annual rainfall of only 17 inches. Very, very dry. So, as an island continent, Australia is the only inhabited continent with no land bridge to another continent. The only way to get off of Australia is by plane or by boat. I guess you could swim, but it'd be really far. All right, so most of us know Australia because of their unusual animals, and they do have quite a few interesting animals. In fact, they have the platypus and the echidna are the only surviving monotremes in the world. The monotreme is a mammal that hatches its young from an egg. Okay, so the platypus and the echidna are the only two. The echidna is the one that's on the continent of Australia. It's like a small anteater with sharp quills, so almost like a combination of I forgot what that thing is called. Of a whatever. Anyway, I'm going to go on. Another species of echidna lives in New Guinea, but there's one that's unique to Australia. And of course, we know them for their koalas and for their kangaroos. We're going to talk about those. Okay, early settlers, because they have not only exotic animals, but they also have exotic plants as well. And one of those is the acacia tree. The early settlers called it a wattle because they actually wove it together to make their houses out of it. It's a very hard wood, but it doesn't grow thick. Okay, we all know, of course, the kangaroos. How about the lorikeets? Aren't they beautiful? Now, I have heard before that the kangaroos in Australia are kind of like deer around here, that you might see one on the side of the road at any time when you're driving. But they also are invasive, that they'll come into your backyard and eat your plants and stuff like that. So think of those as like deer in Australia. And then, of course, the lorikeets. They're so pretty. They have another bird in Australia called the kookaburra, and the kookaburra likes to laugh. Okay, so I'm going to play for you an example of a kookaburra laugh, if I can get it to work. Okay, that's a kookaburra, and it just sounds it sounds really interesting to me. But apparently, you hear those all over Australia. They are unique to Australia. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the states on the Great Dividing Range. The Great Dividing Range is a long range of mountains that go all the way up, and they kind of parallel the eastern coast of Australia, which is where Sydney and Melbourne and all the cities that we've heard about all of our lives are located. Okay, so it's coast and then mountains right up next to it, okay? And then the rest of Australia is fairly flat. So the Great Dividing Range is a rugged complex of low mountains. These are not big like Himalaya type mountains or anything like that. They're relatively low. They also have plateaus and hills that run parallel to the east coast of Australia. These mountains influence the weather patterns of the whole continent because while for us in the northern hemisphere, weather systems tend to run from west to east. So we get our weather out of Alabama. Okay, so from west to east. That's typical, not always, but usually. In Australia, because it's south of the equator, their weather comes from the east towards the west. The wind blows in the different direction, bringing the system across differently. Okay. All right, so where did New South Wales, how was it founded? Well, it was founded by Captain James Cook. He was a famous British explorer. He sailed into Botany Bay, what today is known as Botany Bay. He named it. He found fertile soil there and a very deep harbor. So he found a good spot to continue a colony. And he sailed into the harbor just around the time that America was getting ready to fight for its independence. So when England lost the American colonies as a place to control, England began to use New South Wales as its new prison colony, because before this, they'd sent prisoners to our state, to Georgia, to settle here. But remember, in this time period, England was sending people to prison for having a debt. And that's the type of people that they were trying to move out of the prisons, the actual prisons in England, and send them somewhere else to start over again. So now they were going to send them to Australia. So the first batch of people of Europeans arrived in Australia. There's a little over 1,000 people in that group, and about 759 of them were convicts sentenced to be transported to someplace else. Some of those 759 convicts were actually women and children who came with their spouse or with their parents. Okay, these are the Blue Mountains. Aren't they pretty? And they are called the Blue Mountains because from a distance they look blue. They are not blue, but they're filled with eucalyptus trees, and the eucalyptus trees give off this blue dust that makes the whole mountain look blue. Okay, so south of the Blue Mountains is another part of the Great Dividing Range called the Australian Alps. Let me make sure I'm getting over here to the right page. And the highest point in Australia is here in these Australian Alps. It's part of the Snowy Mountains called Mount Kosciuszko. And it is only 7,310 feet above sea level, which sounds like a lot, but remember, it is, when compared to mountains of the Andes or the mountains of the Himalayas, it's a third of their size. Okay. West of the mountains is an area that's kind of like the American prairie, very flat and grassy and decent enough soil that it can grow grasses. So that is where Australians raise a lot of jumbucks. What are jumbucks? Well, they're sheep. Okay. Pictured here, jumbucks. Okay, the capital city of Australia is also in New South Wales. It is right on the coast, or not right on the coast, it's just a little bit off the coast. And it is called Canberra, which basically is the Aboriginal word for meeting place. They completely designed the city. It was not designed by settlement there. It was, let's set aside this land here, we're going to build a city here. And then, so the whole city was planned out before anybody built anything. And that is a picture of Canberra. Really looks very pretty, doesn't it? All right, I got to finish there, so we'll go on to Victoria tomorrow. I hope you took notes and added some things to them. Have a good day, and I will see you tomorrow.